Hello, my name is Josephine. I came home to see my grandfather, only to find him barely breathing on the floor, while my mother poured wine for guests just a hallway away. They told me not to call 911. They said it would be disruptive. What kind of family prioritizes presentation over a man's final breath? But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they had a plan to erase me, to rewrite him, to make sure silence had the last word. What do you do when the people who raised you pretend you were never there? Would you stay quiet? Or would you show them what remembering really means? By the time I stepped through the front door, the noise hit me first. Chatter bouncing off polished hardwood floors, the clink of glassware, laughter too loud to be real. I stood still for a moment, suitcase still in hand, trying to register the scene. People I hadn't seen in years crowded the foyer, dressed in cocktail dresses and linen blazers, holding wine glasses with practiced poise. Somewhere beyond them, a string quartet was playing something classical, cheerful, and utterly out of place. The smell of lamb roast and expensive cologne blurred together, hitting the back of my throat like a sour joke. I hadn't even had time to change out of my travel clothes. My shirt clung to me, damp from the humid North Carolina summer, and my sandals still carried dust from the bus stop. "Josephine, darling," my mother called out with a smile too tight to be genuine, her voice slicing through the room like a knife wrapped in velvet. She waved me over but didn't bother to step toward me. "I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow." "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Her tone held just enough warmth to sound polite, but underneath it was the same old message. "You're late. You're inconvenient, and now I have to accommodate you." I forced a nod, my jaw already beginning to ache from biting back whatever I might have said. "I wanted to see Grandpa." Her eyes flicked sideways, just a blink too long. "He's resting. We'll check on him after dinner. Why don't you grab a drink and mingle?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Something in her tone had triggered an alarm bell deep in my gut, and I wasn't going to wait for dessert. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I walked past the dining room, past the sea of polite strangers and overly familiar neighbors, toward the back hallway that led to Grandpa Silas's room. The further I got from the music, the more I could hear something else, a soft, irregular rustling, almost like someone was struggling for air. When I opened the door, the air changed. He was on the floor. His frail frame lay crumpled near the foot of the bed, one slipper still on, one foot bare. His chest was rising, barely. His lips were tinged blue, his eyes glassy but open. I dropped the suitcase immediately and dropped to my knees beside him. "Grandpa?" My voice cracked. "Can you hear me?" He tried to move his mouth. No sound came. My fingers scrambled for my phone. I unlocked it with trembling hands and pressed the emergency dial. My thumb hovered over the call button when the door behind me slammed open. "What do you think you're doing?" It was her, Verena, still in her crimson dress, heels clicking like accusations against the floor. She rushed forward and snatched the phone from my hand. "He needs an ambulance," I said, voice shaking but firm. "Now." "Lower your voice," she hissed. "Do you want to cause a scene? There are 30 guests out there eating canapes. Do you think this is the time?" "He's not breathing right," I shouted before I could stop myself. "He could die." Her eyes narrowed into something cold, ruthless. "We'll handle it after the event. I'll call Dr. Franklin later. He knows how to deal with your grandfather's dramatics." Dramatics? I looked down at Grandpa, his chest barely lifting. If this was a performance, he deserved an Oscar and a funeral all at once. I didn't argue. Instead, I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I walked past the hors d'oeuvres tray, through the maze of wine-sipping faces, out the back patio door. I ducked into the shadows behind a rose trellis and hit 911. "Yes, I need an ambulance. My grandfather collapsed. He's having trouble breathing. Please, hurry." I gave the address with precision. My voice didn't break. I was done breaking for these people. By the time I returned to the room, Grandpa's breath had become slower, his eyelids heavier. I dropped to the floor beside him, pressing my hand gently against his arm. "It's okay," I whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. "Help is coming. Just hold on for me, Grandpa." "Please," His fingers twitched, barely a motion, but enough for me to believe he understood. The EMTs arrived about 15 minutes later, bursting into the hallway with urgency that should have happened 20 minutes earlier. The violin music screeched to a halt mid-note, and I heard someone gasp in the dining room. A guest leaned into the hallway, wine glass in hand, eyes wide. "Everything all right?" they asked. Verena stood near the base of the stairs, her smile as brittle as bone. "Just a minor spell. You know how the elderly can be." Silas was loaded onto the stretcher quietly, oxygen mask strapped over his mouth. One EMT turned to me, almost hesitant. "Did you call this in?" "Yes," I said. Verena glared at me like I had defiled the family name. After they wheeled Grandpa into the ambulance, I followed Verena outside. She cornered me beneath the porch light, where her voice could stay low but vicious. "You embarrassed this family." I blinked. "I saved a man's life." "It was a dizzy spell. Your grandfather pulls these stunts for attention, always has. Now we have guests to entertain, and you've just turned our dinner into a tabloid headline." I didn't respond, because nothing I said would matter. She wasn't angry that Grandpa was sick. She was angry that her wine and donations evening had been interrupted by something real. I walked away. Later that night, I sat alone in the guest bedroom, if you could call it that. It had been my old room before Verena turned it into a storage space. Now cleared just enough to host me, it felt hollow, impersonal, like I didn't belong here anymore. I lay on the edge of the bed, the sheets crisp and unused, staring at the ceiling fan above me, slowly turning, creaking like an old clock, counting the seconds too loudly. I replayed that moment in Grandpa's room again and again, the sound of his shallow breath, the way his hand twitched toward me, the horror in my chest when my own mother told me not to help him. What kind of daughter chooses a guest list over a dying man? What kind of family turns love into betrayal? I reached for my phone, hoping, maybe, just maybe, that someone in this house had texted. Cressida. My father. A cousin. Anything. I unlocked the screen. No calls. No messages. Not even a question asking how Grandpa was doing. I walked out with the only copy of Grandpa's death certificate in my hand, the hospital doors sliding closed behind me with that soft hiss that always made me feel like something final had happened. I didn't rush to the parking lot. My steps felt slow, like my feet needed time to catch up with what my heart had just lived through. The sun had long dipped behind the trees, leaving the air heavy with moisture. Crickets had begun their night shift, chirping rhythmically into the thick silence of the hospital grounds. I crossed through the small garden outside the emergency wing and sat on a wooden bench near the fountain. It gurgled softly, like it didn't know someone had just died in the building behind it. I stared down at the manila folder in my lap, his name typed neatly in black letters, date of birth, date of death. No line for the years of listening to me cry about middle school, or the time he slipped me $10 every Sunday for snacks, even though he knew I'd spend it on used books. Just 2 dates, 1 hyphen, a life boiled down into print. I pulled out my phone again. Nothing. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a missed call from Cressida, or even a check-in from Dad. Something human. But the family group chat I had texted hours ago still showed read beside every message. No reply. Earlier, after the doctor told me he had passed, a nurse came by to gently inform me of the steps to take. The way she said, "Do you want to sign the release paperwork?" was soft, respectful, but the question stuck with me. Want to? No, I didn't want to, but I was the only one there. I signed it anyway. I leaned back and stared at the night sky. Asheville had fewer stars than I remembered as a kid, maybe because the trees were taller now. Or maybe I had just learned how to look down too much. After 20 minutes of watching the clouds not move, I stood and headed to the parking lot. My car, dusty from the highway, sat under a flickering lamp. I didn't get in, not yet. Instead, I unlocked my phone and opened Instagram. That was the mistake. The first post at the top of my feed was from my mother. A photo of her and Cressida at the dinner table, wine glasses raised, smiling wide. The caption read, "A beautiful evening with our community, honoring Silas's legacy." Family, first, #blessed. I didn't realize how tight I was holding the phone until my fingers started to cramp. I loosened my grip and scrolled down. There was Cressida's story, her arm linked with Dad's, both of them laughing in front of a photo collage Verena had arranged near the piano. I tapped to the next clip, posted by a mutual friend of the family. It was a video taken from the edge of the room. The lighting was low, but the audio was clear. Verena stood near the drinks table, fixing her lipstick in a compact mirror. She turned toward someone off camera and said, "Josephine's back." Thankfully, she looks devastated. No need to hire anyone to play the grieving granddaughter. There was laughter in the background. I heard my dad's voice join in. My stomach twisted so fast it made me cold. I replayed the clip, twice. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding. It wasn't said in jest. It was calculated, public enough to be captured, but private enough for deniability. They didn't know someone was filming. I stared at the screen until it blurred. It wasn't anger that hit me first. That would have made sense. It was something deeper, like grief's bitter cousin, something that whispered, "See? You thought you were family." I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone or text back some righteous line about human decency. I just saved the clip and sent it to myself in an email. I wanted to remember, not for revenge, just to remind myself I wasn't making this up. After another 10 minutes, I finally got into the car. The drive back to the estate was quiet. I passed through sleepy neighborhoods, most of the porch lights off. The only sounds, the low hum of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional flick of the turn signal. It was almost midnight when I turned into the long, winding driveway. The house was still lit up like a showroom, elegant and artificial. Not one window dark. Either someone was still entertaining, or they didn't know how to be alone with the silence. Probably both. I didn't want to go inside. So, I sat there, engine off, listening to the night. For a moment, I wondered if this is what Grandpa had felt in his final days, being in a house full of people and still somehow feeling like he didn't exist. When I finally entered, the living room had been reset. The chairs straightened, the glasses gone, the flower arrangements fluffed. It looked like nothing had happened, like no one had collapsed, like no one had died. I moved quietly up the stairs, avoiding the boards that creaked. Inside my old room, I placed the folder on the nightstand and sat down on the edge of the bed. I didn't change out of my clothes. I didn't even turn off the lamp. I opened my messages and typed into the family group chat. Grandpa passed at 11:32 p.m. ICU, Mission Hospital. I signed the paperwork. I pressed send. It said delivered. Read, and again, no reply. I left the phone on the nightstand, screen facing down. Then I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling again. This time, there was no fan, just silence, the kind that doesn't ask for your attention. It demands it. Back inside the house, I left the death certificate on the dresser and closed the bedroom door behind me without bothering to lock it. There wasn't a single person in that house who cared enough to come knocking. The house was still, like it had exhaled all the drama and now wanted to pretend it was just another day. Downstairs, the dishwasher hummed faintly. Somewhere behind a closed door, the TV muttered through a muted crime documentary. It felt almost staged, as if the night before hadn't happened at all. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. I don't know how long enough for my body to feel numb in one leg. I stood, stretched slowly, and crossed the hallway toward Grandpa's room. His door creaked as I pushed it open, the hinges letting out a groan I hadn't heard in years. The bed was made, too perfectly. The corners were tucked military tight, and the pillow had been fluffed and centered. Everything felt erased. His old sweater, usually slung over the chair near the window, was gone. So was the little ceramic dish he used to keep his cufflinks and hearing aid batteries in. It was like they wanted to scrub him out before the bed had even cooled. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. His scent still lingered faintly in the air, old books, peppermint, and the soft musk of aftershave he never changed for 30 years. I let it sit on my skin like a reminder. By instinct, I turned toward the nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside, just one thing, his flip phone, the kind with large buttons and an even bigger screen font. I picked it up, expecting the battery to be dead, but when I pressed the button, it lit up. Still 35% charge left. I thumbed through the contacts, mostly first names, all in capital letters. Franklin, Merrick, June. Then I opened the inbox. 12 messages. All from me. Each one dated weeks, even months apart. None opened. Did you eat today? I miss you. Can I call later? I'll be home soon. Want to see you. 12 times I reached out. 12 times I got silence. But now I saw it wasn't him ignoring me. It was him not even seeing me, because someone kept this phone out of his reach. I stared at the messages, willing the tears not to come. Not because I was afraid of crying, but because I knew once they started, they wouldn't stop. And I didn't want to give that to this room. Not yet. I slid the phone into my pocket and turned toward the window. The sunlight peeked through the blinds just enough to cast soft stripes across the floor. I opened them slowly, watching as the backyard came into focus. The garden. Grandpa's garden. When I was little, it was a jungle. Vines hanging like curtains, tomatoes fat and low to the ground, bonsais on a small stone ledge near the back fence. He called them his old souls in small bodies. I slipped on shoes and stepped outside, crossing the yard slowly. The grass hadn't been watered properly, the flower beds were half dead, the stone ledge was still there, but empty. Except for one bonsai tree, toppled over in the corner, roots exposed, leaves brittle. It had been tossed near the garbage bins. I knelt beside it, brushing dirt away from the trunk. A small wooden tag hung from its base, almost hidden under the dried roots. I turned it over and read 2 carved letters. J, just the one letter. But it hit harder than a paragraph. I sat down right there in the dirt, knees pressed to the earth, and let myself feel it. That tree was mine. When I was 19 and packing for college, Grandpa had pulled me aside. I was crying. Not from excitement, but guilt, because part of me didn't want to leave him. Everyone else saw college as freedom. I saw it as abandoning the only person who ever looked at me without wanting to reshape me. He handed me a tiny clipping in a ceramic pot. "This one's yours," he'd said. "She's young, just like you. I'll take care of her while you go find yourself. When you come back, she'll be here." I'd never told a soul about that. It was our thing. Now, seeing it dumped like yard waste, I felt something inside me begin to shift. Not sadness, not shock. Something older, something sharper. The kind of emotion that knows how to keep still until the right moment. I wrapped the bonsai in a towel from the garden shed and carried it inside, careful not to drop more soil than necessary. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. I walked up the stairs, the tree in my arms like a wounded animal. In my room, I cleared the windowsill, placed the bonsai down, and opened the blinds. The light hit the trunk gently, and for a brief second, it almost looked alive again. I touched the edge of the pot. My fingers tightened. My jaw clenched. They could clean his room. They could delete his texts. They could dress up grief in sequins and cocktails. But they couldn't erase what he gave me. "You couldn't even leave this untouched, could you?" I whispered, not expecting an answer, not needing one. Across the hall, I heard laughter, a woman's voice. My sister's, loud and bright, as if nothing had happened. I turned my head, eyes narrowing at the door slightly ajar. The kind of open that wasn't accidental, the kind that invites you to hear what you're not meant to. I stood up slowly and crossed the hallway, my heartbeat steady, not racing, just braced. After I turned away from Cressida's door, I didn't go back to my room. I needed distance from the sound of her laughter. It had this hollow echo, the kind that only stings when it's coming from someone who's mastered the art of pretending nothing happened. I made my way downstairs just as the first light of morning began to press against the sheer curtains in the hallway. The house, somehow, was already alive with activity. I could hear voices in the kitchen, coffee cups clinking, the whir of the blender preparing someone's morning green. When I stepped into the dining room, it felt like I had walked into a brunch spread at a country club. People I didn't recognize were chatting over scones, eggs Benedict, and sparkling juice. The long mahogany table was fully set, like we were celebrating something. Maybe we were. Maybe to them, grief was best handled with linen napkins and polite smiles. Verena stood at the head of the table, radiant in a pastel cardigan and pearls, her makeup freshly applied. I stared at her, trying to understand how someone could bury their own father less than 12 hours ago and still look like she was about to chair a charity gala. "Oh, good, Josephine," she said, her smile wide, rehearsed. "Come, say hello. These are the Walters from the club, and over there's Mr. Reynolds from the foundation." They all wanted to pay their respects. I nodded, said nothing, and took the seat farthest from her. One of the women leaned toward me with that tone people use when they're trying too hard to sound caring. "Such a beautiful service last night. Your grandfather would have been so proud." I just looked at her. I hadn't known there was a service. Apparently, while I was sitting in the ICU signing death certificates, they were toasting champagne under chandeliers and calling it a farewell. I pulled out my phone under the table, needing something to anchor myself. First thing that popped up, a new post from Cressida. Black and white photo of Grandpa smiling, taken at least 10 years ago. The caption read, "Forever in our hearts, we miss you, Papa." I scrolled again. Verena had uploaded video clips from the dinner, wine glasses raised, a violinist playing softly in the background, a speech she gave thanking the community for their outpouring of love. The hashtags made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. Psht, grief is grace. Nij, family. First # legacy of love. Not a single photo had me in it. Not a word acknowledging that I was the one holding his hand when he died. That wasn't an oversight. That was strategy. I locked my phone and slipped it into my bag. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. But they were going to have to do it while looking me in the eye. After breakfast, as people began leaving, Verena floated around the room like a hostess at a fundraising auction. I slipped away into the hallway, needing to breathe somewhere not saturated with perfume and polished smiles. Edith, our longtime housekeeper, caught me as I passed the laundry room. She had aged since I last saw her, more lines around the eyes, a slower step. But her eyes still held that same quiet knowing. "Miss Joe," she said softly, glancing behind her to make sure no one else was near. I need to tell you something." I nodded, stepping into the room with her and closing the door. She lowered her voice, folding a towel she clearly didn't need to fold. "He asked about you every morning. 'Has my Joe written?' he'd say, or 'Did she call?' But your mother, she told us not to disturb him. Not to bring up your name." My chest tightened. "He didn't see my messages." "Did he?" Edith shook her head slowly. "His phone was on the dresser, always. But he wasn't allowed to use it much anymore. She said it upset him, said you being away was too painful for him to handle." "He was dying, Edith," I whispered, every syllable aching. "And nobody called me." "I tried," she said, hands trembling now. "I wanted to, but she said if I ever went behind her back, she'd let me go. And you know this job it's everything for me." I nodded. I didn't blame her. I blamed the woman who sat at the end of the dining table smiling over quiche. Back upstairs, I went into Grandpa's study. It hadn't changed much. The leather chair still faced the window, the bookshelf organized by genre the way he liked it. But his reading glasses were still on the desk, next to a pen and a stack of blank notepaper, like he had meant to write something but never got the chance. I ran my fingers over the rim of the mug still sitting there, coffee long gone cold. I sat in the chair and stared at the blank paper. I could almost hear his voice. "Don't let them turn silence into a weapon." He had waited, and they had told him to wait in silence. A ping on my phone pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked down. Cressida had posted another Instagram story, a slow-motion video of her walking through the garden, arms crossed, looking contemplative. The text overlay read, "Our father figure, our family's light, gone but never forgotten." I stared at the screen. Forgotten? He was forgotten while he was still breathing. I whispered to myself, more to test the words than to express anything. You forgot him while he was still alive. Then I locked the phone and let the silence return. I didn't sleep that night. After seeing Cressida's post and letting those words escape from my mouth, You forgot him while he was still alive. I'd gone back to my room and lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, ears tuned to every creak of the house. The bonsai tree sat quietly on the windowsill, catching bits of moonlight like it was listening too. Sometime after midnight, I got up to use the bathroom down the hall. I didn't turn on any lights. I knew this house blind. The layout hadn't changed in decades. As I passed the guest bathroom, I heard voices drifting from the kitchen downstairs. Low, urgent, the kind of whispers people only use when they're talking about something they shouldn't be. I paused at the top of the staircase and leaned just slightly toward the rail. I say let her stay through Sunday, Verena said. Her voice was clipped, professional, like she was discussing a house guest overstaying, not her own daughter. After that, we'll make it clear she's not needed here, Cressida chuckled. She still thinks that tree in the window means something. It's actually kind of sweet, like a dog waiting for someone who's never coming back. Silence. And then Verena again, colder now. She's been a liability since she left for college. Always off on her own, asking questions, acting like she's owed something. This house isn't for her. It never was. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It felt like the walls were folding in around me, like the air had been sucked out of the hallway. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. They were planning to erase me. Neatly, cleanly, like brushing off crumbs from a linen tablecloth. I turned and walked back to my room with quiet steps, closing the door gently behind me. No sound. No scene. But inside, something was changing. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something sharper. Focused. I couldn't sleep after that. But I didn't cry either. By morning, I was up before the sun. I needed something. Proof, maybe. Something that wasn't hearsay or whispers in the dark. Something that would hold up when the time came. I found myself drawn back to Grandpa's reading room. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne. The leather chair hadn't been moved. On the shelf behind his desk sat a row of books, all thick hardcovers with cracked spines, classics, essays, American poetry. But one in particular caught my eye, a copy of Leaves of Grass, worn and familiar. It was the one he always read in the fall. I pulled it from the shelf. The binding felt soft in my hands, the way books do when they've been held too many times by someone who needed them. I flipped through the pages slowly. And there it was. Just past the halfway mark, folded neatly, tucked into the crease, a handwritten note on Silas's stationery. I recognized the loops of his letters before I even read the words. She's the only one who listens when I speak, even when I don't say a word. This house will forget me. She won't. Give her something that remembers me. It was signed simply, S. I sat down in his chair, note trembling in my fingers. He knew. He knew they'd try to erase him, too. The dinners, the curated posts, the repackaging of grief. He saw it coming, and this note, was his attempt to stop it. He gave me something that would outlive their spin. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my back pocket. Later that morning, I waited until the dining room was clear. Verena and Cressida were in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with coffee mugs, discussing RSVP counts for some upcoming luncheon. Still playing hostess, still pretending. I walked in, steady. They looked up, surprised. Maybe they weren't used to seeing me upright in daylight. Without a word, I took the folded note from my pocket and placed it gently on the island counter between them. Verena's eyes darted down to it, then back to me. Cressida raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Verena asked. "Read it." She picked it up, squinted at the handwriting. I watched her face tighten, just slightly, as her eyes moved across the page. "That note doesn't change anything," Cressida said, reaching for her mug again. Her voice carried that same performative calm she used at funerals and photo ops. I turned to her. "It does if you know how to read it." Verena folded the paper again with precise fingers and laid it down like it was just another flyer for a bake sale. "Where did you get that?" she asked. I met her eyes without flinching. "Where you forgot to look." She said nothing. For once, her tongue paused before spinning another polite excuse. I picked up the note and turned to walk away. Josephine! Verena called out behind me. I didn't stop walking, but I heard the hesitation in her voice, like something had cracked. Back in my room, I placed the letter in the drawer beside the bonsai. They weren't going to bury me in silence, not this time. The silence that followed my last words lingered longer than expected. Verena didn't speak. She didn't frown or raise her voice. She just sat there, eyes locked on the letter like it might vanish if she blinked. That was the first time I had ever seen her speechless, and somehow, it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Gideon arrived. As always, sharply dressed, freshly shaved, his briefcase in hand like it was part of his skin. He greeted everyone with his usual plastic courtesy, pausing only slightly when his eyes met mine. There was tension in the room, unspoken but thick as syrup. Even Alaric, usually so detached, stayed oddly close to the wall like he didn't want to be too visible. We gathered in the study, Verena, Alaric, Cressida, and me. The air conditioning hummed too loudly. Outside, the sun had started its slow slide down the horizon. Inside, time stood still. Gideon began without fanfare. This is the official reading of the last will and testament of Silas W. Langford, signed 2 weeks prior to his passing and submitted through secure email to my office. He opened the folder and began to read. The house, the vehicles, the accounts, all listed. My name didn't come up once. Not when he spoke of the backyard estate, not when he listed the personal belongings Silas cherished, his book collection, his journals, even the old typewriter he'd refused to part with for decades. Everything went to Cressida. There wasn't even a footnote about me. My stomach clenched, not because I hadn't expected it, but because hearing it said out loud made it real. This wasn't oversight. This was erasure with precision. I glanced at Verena. She didn't look at me, just a slight purse of her lips, the same expression she wore when servers poured the wrong wine or someone forgot her parking validation. Gideon closed the folder. And that concludes the contents as submitted. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the quiet settle before I stood up. Can I see the signature? He blinked. Excuse me? The signature on the document, may I see it? He hesitated, then passed me the printed copy. I didn't even need to look closely. That wasn't Grandpa's signature. It looked like it had been lifted, pasted, maybe even scanned and adjusted. Too clean, too symmetrical. No wobble in the Y, no pressure drag on the L like there always had been in his handwriting. And more importantly, it was digital. He didn't even own a computer, I said aloud, turning toward Gideon. He didn't use email. He still wrote checks and paid bills at the post office. Gideon cleared his throat. We received this document from an email account registered under Verena's name with an attachment marked urgent. It matched prior documentation, and you didn't find that odd? I cut in. You didn't think twice about a 90-year-old man emailing a legal file from his daughter's personal account, something he never had access to? Verena finally spoke. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, I said, already walking out. I went straight to Grandpa's room. For years, there was a digital photo frame on his nightstand. Verena had gifted it one Christmas, saying he needed to modernize a little. He only used it to loop old family pictures, mostly ones I had scanned for him, but he never let anyone touch it, not even Edith. I unplugged it and flipped it over. A small slot on the side blinked at me. Micro SD. Back in my room, I slid the chip into my laptop. It took a minute to load. There were over 50 files, mostly old family photos, holidays, birthdays, some blurry shots of flowers from the garden, but one video stood out. The timestamp, 9 days before he died. The clip was under 90 seconds. The video opened on Grandpa's room. The camera angle faced the door, the bed just visible on the right. He was there, frail, breathing heavily, the oxygen tube under his nose. He reached toward the call button near his bed. The door opened. Verena stepped in. He said something, barely audible. Joe. Verena didn't respond. She walked over to the oxygen monitor and calmly turned the knob down. Just a click. Then she picked up the glass of water from the nightstand, took a sip, and walked out. The door shut behind her. I stared at the screen for minutes after the video ended. My hands were shaking, not from shock, but from clarity, the kind of clarity that burns through denial like acid. I copied the video to a secure folder and headed back downstairs. Everyone was still in the study. Gideon was packing his briefcase. Cressida was scrolling through her phone like nothing mattered. I stepped inside, placed the SD card on the desk beside him. "If that signature was emailed from Verena's account," I said, voice level, "you may want to rethink your client." Cressida shot up from her chair. "You don't get to accuse people of—" "I'm not accusing," I interrupted. "I'm proving." Verena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Not one. And that silence, that rare, precious silence, felt like the most honest sound I'd heard in that house in years. I left the study without slamming the door, though every cell in my body screamed to do it. My mother hadn't said a word, and that silence, so rare from someone who always had the last one, rattled the air behind me. The rest of that day moved with eerie stillness. No footsteps above, no whispered arguments in the hall, no clinking of glasses downstairs. The estate, usually humming with quiet judgment, was stunned into submission. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on the floor of my room with every document I could find. Grandpa's prescriptions, medical invoices, a list of his regular appointments, all neatly organized in the old accordion folder I'd found in his desk weeks ago. He had kept everything, and now, so would I. By sunrise, I had highlighted every entry that showed a discrepancy. A missed checkup that had been marked canceled by family, a refill for heart medication that never got picked up. His medical records had been edited, selectively, quietly. I knew what I had to do. After a quick call with a legal clinic in town, I drafted a formal petition to contest the will and gathered every piece of supporting evidence I could fit into a binder. I made copies, scanned everything, uploaded backups to a cloud folder titled simply, Silas. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. I stayed upstairs, watching from the hallway window as a courier walked up to the house. Verena answered in her pressed linen pantsuit, like she'd been waiting for a package of monogrammed linens. He handed her a thick envelope. Her hand froze when she saw the sender's name, a law firm she didn't know. She opened it on the spot, her posture stiffening with every word she read. I watched her expression twist, not in fear, but in something far more dangerous: calculation. 30 minutes later, Cressida stormed into my room without knocking. "What the hell are you doing?" she snapped, waving the letter like it was a death threat. "I'm protecting the only part of this family that ever protected me." Her jaw clenched. "You're destroying us. You think this is justice? You're humiliating our name." "You mean your name," I said evenly. "Because mine hasn't been on anything in this house for years." Cressida paced near the door, flustered in a way I hadn't seen since high school debates. "Do you know how this will look to people? How it'll reflect on Mom, on Dad?" "I think it'll reflect just fine," I replied, calmly placing another set of documents into a folder. "Especially once they see the video." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't." "I already did." She stood still for a long moment, like she was waiting for me to soften. I didn't. Then she turned and slammed the door behind her. That night, I couldn't shake the need to keep digging. I returned to Grandpa's study, lit only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. Something in me knew there was more. Something he'd left behind, not in plain sight, but somewhere she hadn't dared to look. I pulled out every drawer again, feeling along the backs, tapping for loose panels. And in the lowest drawer, behind a row of faded file folders, I found it. A false bottom. Thin, carefully wedged. I slid it out. There was a single envelope inside. Sealed, addressed to me in his handwriting. The stamp was there, the postmark faint, but it had never been mailed. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. "If you're reading this, they probably tried to bury you too," he wrote. "But don't let them. I left more than memories behind. Ask Merrick. He knows where to find it." I read it 3 times before folding it shut. My chest tightened, not with grief, but with vindication. He'd known. He'd anticipated this. And Verena had buried it, intentionally. She had no plan for me to ever read this. I slipped the letter into my coat pocket and left the house. The sky was already darkening by the time I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward town. Downtown Asheville at night was quieter than I remembered. The law office was small, tucked between a florist and a bakery that had closed early for renovations. Merrick's name was on the glass door in neat gold lettering, almost modest in comparison to the truth he was guarding. He opened the door himself, white hair neatly combed, tie loosened. He looked at me with a knowing kind of sadness. "I was wondering how long it would take you," he said. "I didn't even know what I was looking for," I admitted. "Until now." He led me inside. No assistants, no fanfare. Just bookshelves stacked to the ceiling and a heavy wooden desk that reminded me of Grandpa's. He gestured for me to sit. "I have something for you," he said after a beat, walking to a locked cabinet. "Silas gave it to me a year ago, said to hold it until you came asking." He returned with a thin file, wrapped in ribbon, yellowed slightly from time. He placed it on the desk between us. "This changes everything," he said, quietly but clearly. I didn't reach for it yet. I looked at him first. "Does it change how I feel about them?" I asked. "No," he replied. "But it might change what they're allowed to take from you." The file Merrick laid between us felt heavier than it looked. Not in weight, but in consequence. He didn't rush me. He just folded his hands on the desk and waited, as though he understood that some truths needed a breath before being unsealed. I untied the ribbon slowly and flipped open the folder. Inside was a copy of the will, the actual will, the real one. It bore Grandpa's original signature, clearly inked, notarized, dated 6 weeks before his death. My name was there, listed plainly alongside one specific line. "To Josephine Langford, I leave the Garden Estate, my private journals, and the southern parcel as she alone remembered me when I was still here." Beside it was a short letter in his handwriting, written on the same monogrammed stationery I found the other note on. "She is the one who remembered me while I was alive, not just in grief, not in hindsight, but in presence. She showed up." That word, presence, hung in my chest like a second heartbeat. I folded the documents gently, then met Merrick's eyes. "Will it hold up?" He nodded. "Legally, absolutely. It's notarized, has 2 witnesses, and predates the document Gideon presented by weeks. And that video you have, it makes this nearly impossible to dispute. It's over, Josephine." No, I thought. It's only just beginning. 2 hours later, we were back at the estate. The sun had dropped low in the sky, casting a warm orange tint across the wraparound porch. Merrick brought 2 associates with him, both in pressed suits and that subtle confidence lawyers seem to learn in the womb. Verena, Alaric, Cressida, and Gideon were already seated in the drawing room when we entered. Their posture was stiff, their faces unreadable. Verena's hands were folded so tightly on her lap, her knuckles had turned pale. Cressida looked like she was suppressing a yawn. Gideon tapped his phone screen, pretending not to care. I sat beside Merrick without a word. He cleared his throat. "We're here to present the original, notarized will of Mr. Silas Langford, signed 6 weeks prior to his passing, and kept securely per his personal instructions." He opened the folder and laid the documents on the table. Silence. Alaric leaned forward, squinting. "This isn't the same will we read earlier." "That's correct," Merrick replied, "because that version was falsified." Gideon stiffened. "Now wait. I have the notary's statement," Merrick interrupted calmly, "as well as digital confirmation of the document's timestamp and location, that," he pointed at the older document, "was signed by Silas in this city, in person, under witness." Verena didn't blink. She was ice. Cressida, however, wasn't. "This is ridiculous," she said, laughing under her breath. "So she gets a garden and a box of diaries, and suddenly we're pretending that makes up for everything?" I looked at her, unflinching. "You can pretend all you want, but Grandpa didn't." Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't stop. "While you were busy planning luncheons and scheduling photo ops, he was calling my name with his last breath. And you know what? You never even heard him because you weren't listening." Merrick slid the letter toward them. Verena glanced at it and then turned her face away. I stood, pulling a second envelope from my bag. "I have one more thing to deliver." And I left. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for questions. I walked straight to the mailbox at the end of the drive and slipped the envelope in. It was addressed to the Asheville Standard, our local newspaper. Inside was a printed letter titled, "A Family That Watched a Man Die While Pouring Wine." It didn't name names, it didn't need to. It told the story of a man ignored in the final moments of his life. It spoke about legacy and grief dressed up for guests, and how sometimes silence screams louder than mourning. I mailed it not for revenge, but because closure sometimes isn't quiet. The next morning, the article was front page. People in town read it over breakfast. The florist downtown left a white lily at our mailbox. A barista at the cafe gave me my coffee on the house with a soft smile and a quiet, "Your grandfather came here every Tuesday." By noon, the phone at the estate wouldn't stop ringing. Verena didn't answer. Cressida lost her upcoming endorsement with the wellness brand she'd been parading on Instagram. The company issued a bland statement about values misalignment. Gideon was called into a review by his firm. Conflict of interest. Mishandling client documentation. His name vanished from the office website the next day. Me? I sat under the magnolia tree in the backyard, bonsai beside me, its tiny leaves catching sunlight. A breeze rustled the petals above me. I closed my eyes and let the wind press against my skin. I didn't win, but I wasn't erased. I opened my eyes just as my phone pinged. A text. From her. "We need to talk. Mom." I stared at it, and then I placed the phone face down on the table. The morning after the article ran, I woke up to birdsong instead of silence. For once, the estate didn't feel like it was holding its breath. The walls didn't hum with tension. There were no shoes clicking across the floor, no voices echoing down the halls rehearsing alibis or spinning stories, just a stillness that felt earned. I hadn't opened Verena's text. It still sat there on my screen. We need to talk, and maybe we did, but not yet, maybe not ever. 1 week passed, and the house was nearly empty. Gideon had stopped showing up. Cressida moved back to Charlotte, telling friends she needed space from the drama. Alaric disappeared into his office, barely speaking a full sentence to anyone, and Verena had mastered the art of absence while still living in the same walls. I packed slowly. I wasn't leaving in anger. I'd done that before. This was different. This time, I was leaving with everything that mattered to me. I walked the length of the upstairs hallway carrying a single box. Grandpa's old glasses, our photo from the state fair when I was 11, the bonsai tree, and a stack of letters he'd written to himself but never mailed. I stopped at his study one last time. The door creaked open just like always. The scent of old paper and lemon wood polish greeted me like an old friend. No ghost of him appeared, no final whisper. Just that empty chair and his reading glasses, waiting for someone to remember where he left them. I walked in and placed the glasses gently on the desk, aligned perfectly with the blotter. I ran my hand over the chair back once, then left the room without closing the door. I wanted it to stay open. That afternoon, I sat on the porch steps while my lawyer explained over the phone that the estate transfer had been completed. Everything Grandpa had left me, his journals, the southern parcel, the garden, was now legally mine. "You want to develop the land?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want to give it back." I requested that the land be donated for public use, a small community garden, in Grandpa's name. I forwarded the paperwork and closed the file. A month later, I stood at the edge of that newly fenced plot, watching a city crew install a simple wooden sign. No gold letters, no portrait, just a small inscription carved across the grain. For those who were forgotten too early. People passed by. Some paused. A few left flowers. An older man stood for 10 minutes just looking at the sign. When I smiled at him, he nodded but didn't speak. It was enough. The bonsai tree, cleaned, replanted, sat on a stone pedestal at the center of the plot. I knelt next to it and watered the roots slowly, watching the dirt drink it in like a long-lost memory. A child came up behind me, maybe 8 or 9, wide eyes, clutching her mother's hand. "Who's Silas?" she asked. I glanced at her mother, who smiled politely but didn't answer. He was someone who listened, I said simply, even when no one else did. On Saturdays, I began offering workshops. Just a few kids at first, some too restless to sit, others too shy to speak. We planted basil and mint, taught the soil how to accept a second chance. Parents would linger, chatting quietly near the benches, watching the transformation happen 1 inch at a time. People started calling the space Silas's garden, even though that wasn't its official name. But it fit. It always would. I didn't talk about what happened at the estate unless someone asked, and even then, I kept it short. Not because I was ashamed, because I didn't want Grandpa's legacy to be about who betrayed him. I wanted it to be about who still remembered. The house eventually went on the market. Verena moved into a condo uptown. She hosted small events again, quiet ones, tasteful ones. She never mentioned me publicly, never issued an apology. I never expected her to. Some people confuse grace with guilt. I wasn't going to teach her the difference. One afternoon, I sat beneath the magnolia tree at the edge of the garden. It was a cool spring day, breeze light enough to make the blossoms dance overhead. I had a journal in my lap, but hadn't written anything yet. The bonsai sat beside me. I looked at it, not as something I'd inherited, but something I had carried forward. The wind shifted. I closed my eyes. I came home to say goodbye to him, I whispered. And I didn't know I'd end up saying goodbye to the people who raised me too. But I had. And the silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a house finally quiet. Sometimes, the loudest kind of love is quiet persistence, the kind that shows up even when no one's watching. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about remembrance, about choosing truth over performance, presence over legacy, and learning when to walk away without needing applause. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? Like you were written out of a story you helped build? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your voice. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that uncover what families often try to hide.